And another thing that's beyond words, I think, is what Israel continues to do to journalists. This weekend, at least, or just this week, sorry, at least 21 people, including 5 journalists who were killed, over 50 injured in a double tap strike on Nasser hospital. What are your thoughts on this as a journalist yourself, and on Israel's kind of intentional elimination and targeting of journalists in Gaza?
It's horrifying. I mean, every single time a journalist is killed, and I should start out by saying Israel is the leading killer of journalists in the world in modern history. So, a Brown University study, a very important study, came out showing this isn't even that recent. It was several months ago that it came out. So, which shows you the scale of these atrocities, showed that Israel has killed more journalists in Gaza than in the US Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Korea War, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yugoslavia combined. That is how many journalists Israel has killed in Gaza. You're talking about, if you're looking at the Committee to Protect Journalists, just under 200. If you're looking at higher numbers, which are likely the more accurate ones coming out of Gaza, you're talking about a minimum of 240 journalists. This is a staggering number, and it's systematic, and it's targeted, and it's deliberate. They have threatened many of these journalists for months before killing them. They have smeared them in death and in life sometimes, and they have lied about why they've killed them. I don't even know where to begin except to say that sometimes when you hear about the killing of a journalist, you think, might this be the time that people are finally going to demand that this stop? We thought maybe it was the killing of our colleague Ismail al-Ghul in July of 2024, when Israel hit him so hard that he actually was beheaded and his own colleagues saw his head separated from his body. Maybe it was the killing of 19-year-old Hassan Hamad in his home. Hassan was in his own room uploading material. He worked for a production company called Mediatown, which we actually partner with on all of our films at Fault Lines, an incredible Palestinian Gaza-based production company. Hassan was targeted with a drone in his own home, 19 years old. And by the time his colleagues found his body, they could only collect some parts and put them in a small bag. That's how shredded his body was. Or maybe it was the killing of Anas al-Sharif, Al Jazeera's most prominent journalist, on August 10th. He was the most famous face in Gaza, and if Israel can get away with killing him, they can really get away with killing any journalist. Again, they smeared him as a Hamas operative, which is a patent lie. It's absolutely untrue. And of course, that didn't stop them, because yesterday they killed 5 more journalists. And actually, after that attack you talked about, the double tap strike at Nasser Hospital, they also killed another journalist in his tent. So this is just unending. It's horrific. It's outrageous. And for the most part, I see silence from the media industry in the West. Not just silence. Sometimes I see an outright justification of these killings. And talk about adding insult to injury. When a state like Israel can get away with killing the highest number of journalists ever killed in any one place in modern history, that puts a target on the back of every single journalist anywhere in the world. It makes all journalists unsafe. And rather than give these Palestinian journalists their solidarity, their support, rather than demand that Israel stop killing them, rather than demand that Israel be punished and sanctioned for these killings, sometimes we see Western journalists actually amplifying Israeli lies and justifications for these killings.
I do also want to show a very disturbing clip. This is chief commentator Zvi Yehzevel from channel I-24 in Israel. Here's what he had to say about Gaza-based journalists. He said this live on air. And if Israel has already decided to eliminate the journalists, then better late than never. Just to be clear, these are journalists who hide in hospitals, who set up war rooms there, who broadcast to the world a completely distorted picture, still serving Hamas's interests. You could say that the spearhead of Hamas's military wing are those Nukba journalists. Therefore, Israel did well to eliminate them. In my view, it was too late, and there are still many, many more who continue to cause image and perceptual damage in a battle that, unfortunately, we are not particularly excelling in. I like that idea that it's like they're just bad at PR. The problem isn't that they're killing, murdering children, um, leading in child amputations, as you know from your work. It's no, it's just a question of ER and damage control. But what are your thoughts? I mean, about this insane statement that again, you'd think that people would say this behind closed doors, but they actually broadcast it.
It's heinous. I mean, it's a heinous, outrageous smear, and there's a reason that after the Holocaust, people who were working in media were prosecuted for incitement to genocide and violence. There's a reason that even in, the Rwanda genocide, journalists were also put on trial. This is just an example of that, and of that dehumanization, the smears, the lies that are used to fuel Israel's campaign of violence that it's unleashed, its campaign of terror for nearly 2 years in Gaza. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have so many different organs and elements of the state, including, unfortunately, journalists, so-called journalists in Israel, who are inciting violence against fellow journalists. It's disgusting, it's disappointing, but at the same time, when you look at opinion polls, a vast majority of Israelis actually support
Exactly.
Gaza.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, the fact that, it's like in some cases, look, I as a US citizen, I always appreciate that people are able to distinguish between governments and societies, but honestly, like I had someone on the show who's both a friend and a guest, and he's one of the subjects in this documentary I'm making about Holocaust survivors and their descendants who are speaking out against genocide. He's the son of Holocaust survivors. He says that this is the most democratic genocide in history
Mm.
because of the level of support for it. And as you just pointed out, polling from earlier of August, shows that 76% of Israeli Jews think there are no innocents in Gaza. Um, I mean, I don't know what to say about that, except there's a sickness there. What do you think is stopping journalists here from speaking out? Because I mean, I think that if this were in any other country, there would be moments of silence. There would be calls from our government. There would be calls like extremely strong condemnations. And it's obviously not strong enough because you just had this person announcing that there should and will be more of these murderous attacks.
You've seen a very organized campaign to actually delegitimize Palestinian journalists, to paint them as biased, as unprofessional, as Hamas, even as fighters. And they don't even need evidence provided by the Israeli military. Unfortunately, Israel's word is enough, even though Israel has repeatedly lied to journalists. I mean, well before October 7th, 2023, we have ample examples of Israel lying to journalists time and again, whether it was in 2021 when they told a group of journalists that they were going to go into Gaza with ground troops. Um, and then in reality, they admitted that they actually lied and that they wanted Hamas fighters to go underground and they wanted to bomb them in their tunnels. They admitted, they said, yeah, we used the media. Haha, isn't that great? Or when they killed my Al Jazeera colleague Shireen Abu Akleh in 2022 and repeatedly lied about that and only were forced to admit that they were the ones who killed her after many investigations. Shireen's killing was the most investigated killing of any Palestinian in history. So many different news organizations actually looked into it. My own team at Fault Lines, but also CNN and New York Times and Washington Post and United Nations and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, everything you can imagine, Bit Salem. Everybody investigated her killing, and it was only after all those investigations was Israel finally, with their back to the wall, able to admit that it was actually one of their soldiers. But even then, there was no accountability. There was nothing. So, despite its very long track record of outright lying to and misleading journalists still believe them. And let me give you the latest outrageous example. And unfortunately, there is no shortage of examples. Every single day, there are examples of Western legacy media taking what the Israeli military says, and even though it makes no sense, no logical sense, and publishing it without any question, without actually reporting out those claims. Just today, the Israeli military and government came out and said that when they attacked Nasser hospital complex, it was because of a Hamas camera that was on the roof that they were actually trying to get. Well, first of all, what is a Hamas camera? Second of all, it was verified that that's actually the Reuters live stream position. The Reuters and AP live stream position is what they attacked. So first of all, we know that they attacked the Reuters and live stream position. And secondly, let's say it was true and it was a Hamas camera. Again, so many logical problems with that. Number one, why is it two strikes? If you're only going after the camera, why do you then go and strike again and kill that group of journalists and the rescue workers that came to check on the first journalist who was attacked? Number two, if you're saying that your intelligence is so good and you know exactly that this is a Hamas camera and you're going after the Hamas camera, wouldn't your intelligence also show a group of journalists and a group of rescue workers that you then went on to attack? It makes no sense. They don't actually report out the claims that Israel makes. Instead, what does Reuters do? Again, an AP, it is their live position. They put in the headline, Israel says they were attacking a Hamas camera. This is stenography. This is not journalism. It is embarrassing. It is unprofessional. And it aids and abets genocide when they're constantly regurgitating what a state that's plausibly accused of committing genocide says to justify its ongoing mass killing campaign.
It is beyond disgusting, and the double tap thing, which is like such a disgusting, it's almost like a casual like way of describing it, a double tap thing. You're just like killing people, and then when they're rescue workers coming, you're killing them, and not even afraid to be doing that, and not feel embarrassed to be doing that because they won't face any consequences. And there was that other journalist from Al Jazeera who he was forced to bleed to death like over the course of a few hours because they just yeah.
December 2023.
And we don't like, no one knows that name. No one knows what you're talking about except for people who follow this really closely. Like, imagine if Russia had done that. Imagine if Russia had shot a Ukrainian journalist, and then as aid workers and ambulances tried to get to that Ukrainian journalist to save that journalist's life, they killed the rescuers, and that journalist was bleeding out over the course of a few hours. I mean, it would be nonstop coverage and rightfully nonstop coverage and rightfully nonstop condemnation. And we actually have these headlines referring to the stenography that you just referred to. So, and this is the great Asal Rod gathered this. She tweeted, "I can't believe these are real headlines. Israel bombed a hospital twice, killing journalists and rescue workers on video for everyone to see. And Western media tries to justify it by saying they were targeting a Hamas camera. This is not journalism. It's embarrassing." And then you see, let's just click through some of them. So the AP, Israeli military says strikes on Gaza hospital targeted what it says was the Hamas camera. Reuters, initial inquiry says Hamas camera was targeted Israeli strike that killed journalists. Next, CNN, IDF's initial inquiry into Gaza hospital strike claims troops identified Hamas camera. And then Sky News, Gaza latest, Israel claims troops saw Hamas camera before deadly hospital attack. And again, just imagine if this was a Russian thing. Imagine any comparable headlines, right?
Absolutely. I share your outrage, and I wish everyone was as outraged. Can we also just take a step back and acknowledge the fact that the first journalist killed in that strike was a Reuters journalist?
Oh, yeah.
He was working for them, and they're helping to cover up the killing of their own journalists. Maryam Abu Daqqa, 33 years old, was working for the Associated Press. The Associated Press minimizes her role with them by calling her a freelancer, doesn't even put her name in a headline. I mean, to your point, everybody should know these names. But part of dehumanization is to gloss over these atrocities, is to minimize them, is to whitewash them, is to help Israel justify and rationalize them. And the fact that we know so little about all of these journalists,
Right.
who were killed, they were somebody's entire universe. Anas al-Sharif was only 28 years old. He had so many opportunities to leave Gaza. In fact, his own family, after he was killed, said that he was told a few days before he was killed, "We can help you leave Gaza, just stop reporting." And he refused. That is heroic. That is the pinnacle of what you would consider a journalist of integrity, of professional commitment, of courage and bravery. Maryam Abu Daqqa had been separated from her 12-year-old son for a year and a half before she was killed. All of these journalists have written wills to their loved ones, to their colleagues, last statements and last words. The fact that all of them have taken the time to actually write their last will and testament, the words that they wish to be remembered by, tells you everything about this killing campaign that Israel has unleashed on the journalists of Gaza. I just want to say that these are the most incredible, devoted, caring, generous people that you can imagine. All they want to do is bear witness and tell the story and continue the coverage, because to them it's a mission that's intrinsic to who they are, regardless of the sacrifice. They're doing all of this, they're covering everything happening in Gaza while suffering the same thing. They've been displaced from their homes so many times, having to sleep in tents. They've been starved, they've been injured, they've lost loved ones, separated from their family members. They have no offices, no equipment. And we're not talking about a few months. This has been going on for almost 2 years. And, their professionalism has been sort of impugned or questioned, whether they're actually journalists. And in fact, in my experience, they're so much more professional than some of the journalism that you see in these legacy newspapers that actually turns out to have been completely debunked. And I'm thinking specifically of some of the October 7th atrocity propaganda that helped lead us to this moment. And just to give you one small example, when we were working on The Night Won't End, I was in touch with a journalist in Gaza who thankfully is still alive. I very much, pray for his safety, because nobody is safe. This journalist has said, we feel that these are our last days. And the fact that they could just say that says so much. But we were talking about covering a case of a field execution, because we'd heard that Israeli soldiers were actually going into Palestinian homes in Gaza, separating the men from the women and children, and then executing the men in front of the women and children, or sometimes executing the women, depending on the different cases. And he had heard about a case and went to go cover it, but we asked him about who the eyewitnesses were, and he said, well, there was one neighbor who heard but didn't see anything, so I didn't interview him. Imagine if in these legacy media, legacy newsrooms, if they had that level of professionalism in terms of what actually counts for serious journalism in pursuit of the truth and facts, and not just regurgitating propaganda given to you by a state that's accused of genocide.
We have photos of some of the intrepid journalists who were killed, and I do want to show their images because I think that's important.
Hussam al-Masri was the Reuters journalist who was the first person killed. Maryam Abu Daqqa is the journalist I mentioned, who's 33 years old, who left behind a 12-year-old son. She worked for the Associated Press. Muaz Abu Taha was a freelance journalist who worked with several news organizations. And this is really important. Just days before he was killed, worked on an incredible piece that 972 magazine did about starvation in Gaza, which makes you think this is not accidental. These people are targeted. Muhammad Salama was my colleague at Al Jazeera, incredible journalist. He refused to leave Nasser hospital complex. He stayed there until the end, and he documented so many atrocities there. And when they kill these journalists, they not only kill the eyes and ears, and they not only stop the coverage, which I think is the intention, they also kill the memory, because these journalists should have been present in war crimes investigations to testify. They were eyewitnesses to crimes that they themselves reported and documented, and now they're gone. And I think that's part of the intention here in silencing them, is silencing eyewitnesses.